The NCAA Division I Transformation Committee on Tuesday officially recommended, you probably read, allowing 25% of teams in sports with at least 200 schools to compete in championship events, among them the NCAA tournament. There are 363 Division I men's basketball teams. So what that suggests is a 90-team NCAA tournament. But Norlander, as you pointed out on Twitter, just because the NCAA tournament might soon be allowed to expand to 90 teams doesn't mean it will expand to 90 teams. So why don't we start with you explaining exactly what this development does and does not mean?
Good morning, GP. Hello to everyone. Thanks for watching. Click, again, like and subscribe if you can, if you have not already. If you're listening afterward and you want to, go ahead and do that. All right, so yeah, Tuesday was a long-awaited day just in terms of 2022 was the year when the Transformation Committee met on almost a weekly basis and talked about a whole bunch of stuff. And while the initial belief of that committee was that it would potentially bring wholesale changes to the nature of what it even meant to be a Division I institution and what Division I high major college athletics look like, that's really not what happened and transpired on Tuesday. And there are definitely people around college athletics that are a little let down and certainly underwhelmed by what did happen. I think context with all this is also very important. So we're obviously going to talk about the recommendation to allow sports to expand their championship tournaments. But in talking to people last fall and even this week, a couple of them have been pointed to note that while this is certainly a recommendation, and it is part of it, it is there, so much of the energy and time and discussion of what the Transformation Committee was doing throughout 2022 didn't really have a lot to do with expanding postseason championships. So this is part of it, but if for anyone that's seeing these headlines and thinking this was like the predominant talking point, it might have taken up 5% of the committee's total energy of what they discussed all of last year. So just keep that context in mind there. And I do have what we're going to talk about here is the lead item of the court report this week, my notebook. So I think we'll be able to get that into the podcast description as well, because I think the court report's going to go live as we literally podcast on this. So the most important piece of context, I think, is that just because the Transformation Committee suddenly wrote that, you know, Division I sports with more than 200 participants have the ability, and we might even recommend expanding to postseason fields with as much as 25% of your membership, it doesn't mean like suddenly this new door has been opened. Let's focus obviously on college basketball, men's college basketball, what this podcast is mostly all about. Shouts to Camel Fighting, Dodo Birds, and Leaky Black. The selection committee, which in Division I men's basketball committee, which holds the most power in this, it has always had the option to expand. In many years it has expanded from, you know, the late 60s until 1985. It expanded incrementally and with regularity, and then obviously we went from 64 for almost 2 decades, went to 65 teams once the Mountain West came into form and they didn't want to give up an at-large bid. And then obviously there was the great 68 compromise back in the late 2000s. 2011 was the first 68 team field, and since then there have been opportunities for the tournament to expand. But as my court report piece states, and I spoke with a number of sources across the industry, both this week and in recent months, there has never, even though the opportunity has been there and there have been like informal discussions, it's never seriously ever been considered. So just because the Transformation Committee is putting it out there, and it will shine a big spotlight on men's college basketball because of this, it doesn't mean that it is going to happen, should happen, needs to happen. In fact, I would argue, based on my sourcing, there are a lot of powerful people at the NCAA who do not want the NCAA tournament to expand. There are powerful power brokers involved in the nature of putting on this tournament, even outside of the NCAA, that aren't eager to see this tournament expand and very much like it at its 68-team format with the bracket the way it is, 3 weeks, 3 weekends, and so on and so forth. I don't think the tournament is going to expand. So while the headline, and certainly not expand massively, I don't think that's happening, and not anytime soon, and not before minimally the TV contract with CBS Sports and formerly Turner Sports, is now Warner Brothers Discovery Sports. That goes until 2032. I frankly would be stunned if we got to 88, 90 teams in the next decade. I don't think we're going to expand at all anytime soon. I do think, you know, ground is plowed decades in advance, right? In the 1980s, Like the college football playoff, that's not run by the NCAA, and that dates back to a huge case with the Supreme Court back in the 1980s that essentially eventually paved the way. College football had a bizarre postseason set up forever where, there were like 4 national championships in one year, depending on who won what bowls, like just a different kind of sport altogether. But eventually you got the BCS. Now you have the CFP, and college football has its own autonomy to run that outside the purview of the NCAA. The men's NCAA tournament is the only money-making operation for the NCAA. The women's NCAA tournament, which is making huge strides and could eventually be a moneymaker, it loses money. The men's NCAA tournament is the only thing that makes money that the NCAA runs, and it makes so much money that it basically affords hundreds and hundreds of schools to be able to field scholarship sports by the dozens across the country there. So a lot of people are very in tune and aware of how good the product is right now and not wanting to fuss with it too much. You add more teams, you add more games, you add more logistics, you add a lot more cost, you add a lot more travel, and the value proposition of going from 68 to 80 plus 90, there are a lot of people that think that actually monetarily that would not be a good thing, that you're not going to make a lot more money. You might end up winding up losing more money, and then actually the schools that might wanting to get involved in this because of the way the money gets split up with the tournament, it actually makes you go backward financially, at least in the short term there. I do think down the road, years and years from now, going from 68 to 72 on the table, maybe 72 to 76. I do think that compromise could eventually be happening. But just based off of conversations I've had with a lot of people, it's not just like we don't really see a lot of upside in expanding right now. There are people invested in this tournament, GP, who are, I would say, pretty dug in on their heels about not wanting to expand. So we might look up in a year or two and see that whole expansion thing, that was the baseball tournament, the softball tournament, the lacrosse, that stuff might apply. In men's basketball, I'm not saying I'm like a lone voice in this, because I'm not, but I'm very skeptical based off of my conversations that there will be any significant and major NCAA tournament expansion at any point in the next decade.
And that's what I wanted you to say and explain, because I think some people yesterday see the tweets and it says NCAA tournament is going to be allowed to expand up to 90. And that gets translated into, oh, wow, the NCAA tournament is going to expand to 90. And as you just explained, that's not only is that not necessarily true, it is probably not true. So just given the attention that got yesterday in the past 24 hours, I thought it was a reasonable place to start and address. I don't want to spend much more time on it, but I will say this. I'm personally not somebody who believes expansion of the NCAA tournament will ruin college basketball. It's never ruined the NBA or the NFL or Major League Baseball or the World Cup or anything else. So when you hear somebody say the NCAA tournament expanding would ruin college basketball, they're being over dramatic. I think their heart's in a good place, because I agree with them in the sense that it's not good for college basketball. But based on history of other sports, the idea that playoff expansion, which is what this would be, would ruin the sport, that's simply untrue. But what is true is that the NCAA tournament does not need to expand to make sure all the good teams are in. We already put average teams in the bracket every year. I promise you, good teams really don't get left out. We don't need more average teams. And either way, basing an argument in favor of NCAA tournament expansion on the idea that you need to include 25% of 363 teams is just super silly, especially when around a third of those 363 teams, and maybe more, don't matter at all. Hopefully, the smart people with power in the sport understand as much. I trust that they do. But if they don't, and they do make a move on this thing, they will be moving the sport of college basketball in the wrong direction.